What is up, enthusiasts? It is Cedar Flags here, and welcome back to another one of my videos. As you know, roller coasters are absolutely massive investments, and aren't designed overnight. Throughout its design process, a roller coaster could take several years from its initial planning to its opening. So, today we are going to be looking at that very design process. Naturally, while designing anything, you're going to scrap a few things that you've either tested or just left behind in the initial brainstorming. Something that may be an idea for a few days and then scrapped, or something that could be built. Either way, these are changes in the layout before the final product is revealed, and most of these we never see. But fortunately for us, we do know a few changes to rides before the announcement was revealed. Today, I am not going to be talking about roller coasters that had conversions midway through their lives. Today, I'm going to be talking about changes made to a roller coaster before they open to the public for the very first time. This is Cedar Flags, and today, we are going to be looking at 6 roller coasters that changed their plans. So, to start off this video and potential series, I want to talk about an example that many people know to a change of a layout, just to lay the groundwork of it. So I am starting off looking at Maverick. One of the most popular rides at Cedar Point, this ride is the jack of all trades when it comes to its layout. As you know, Maverick only has 2 inversions right now, but after the second launch, there was originally going to be a low to the ground Heartline roll, similar to how the Mosasaurus roll is, but much tighter and much more whippy. So why didn't they open this up? This third inversion was actually constructed on the ride, and they actually had test rides with people on them, including the Cedar Point staff. And they basically said that it was way too painful, and their necks hurt after the experience. So they decided to scrap the element and replace it with an S-bend. And for some reason, that piece is in a field in Mansfield, Ohio right now, and has been sitting there for a while. But anyways, Maverick actually had a few other changes before this. In the mid-2000s, years before Maverick opened up, they were originally planning for Maverick to be a B&M hyper floorless coaster. Similar to Kraken at SeaWorld Orlando, but on a much grander scale, they were planning on this being the greatest B&M looper of all time. And they thought this through for a while, until they initially scrapped the plans and went with the Intamin option instead. Going from Ohio to California, we have what is quite possibly one of the most unique roller coasters on the planet. X2 was Arrow's last coaster, but they did not go out with a whimper. And as you may or may not know, this ride is absolutely massive. It was the prototype and it was a hyper coaster. So this was an absolutely massive investment. In fact, it was over 45 million US dollars. But did you know that the original concept for this ride was much smaller? Basically, Arrow and its designers, including Alan Schilke, the head designer, wanted a ride to be much shorter. They said that this was the ride's prototype, so they didn't want to make it as big, but Six Flags decided to give them more money and say, let's make this ride bigger. This is what the original ride was supposed to look like. It would have a drop, a Raven turn, a normal Outer Bank turn, and then it would finish off the ride pretty quickly. Though the ride is much bigger today, it probably had more negative consequences on Arrow than positive. Though, this ride definitely still lives on to be one of the craziest and most demented rides of all time. Though I do still think if it were small, I feel like it would still be an incredible addition to this amazing park. For our next spot, let's go back to Cedar Point, the roller coaster capital of the world, and one of the main points I talk about on this channel. Now we are talking about Magnum, another revolutionary coaster, but for a completely different reason. When this coaster opened up, it was the world's first hypercoaster, which meant that it went at a height of over 200 feet. The story starts in the mid-1980s, when Dick Kinzel and his crew at Cedar Point were looking for something big, specifically a big, tall roller coaster with no inversions and full of airtime moments. He was inspired off of Bandit at Yomiuriland, which is a massive Togo coaster. So naturally, he initially thought, let's make this ride a Togo. In fact, the original ride was going to be 187 feet tall, and like I said, manufactured by Togo. Eventually, they decided to go with Aerodynamics instead, as it would be much easier since they're an American manufacturer, and eventually, Aerodynamics with Cedar Point decided that it would be a much more marketable option if they made the ride in excess of 200 feet. So they changed the manufacturer and the height, and we have the Magnum we know today. Funny enough, there are a few more Cedar Point coasters that were publicly redesigned, including Top Thrill Dragster, Corkscrew, and Gemini, but that's for another video. Going from Cedar Point to Kentucky, we have the one and the only Storm Chaser. Quite possibly one of the most insane RMCs out there, this ride is extremely violent with its low to the ground airtime moments and very good amount of pacing. This is one of my favorite coasters of all time, and for many, many reasons. But, did you know this ride was going to have an extra airtime moment attached? Funny enough, like the Heartline roll on Maverick, this was announced in the announcement video, but unlike Maverick, was never built. Near the end of the ride, there is a tiny helix, but instead of that, there was originally going to be an outward bank turn low to the ground, and they called it the tip out corner. Now, this was going to be a very tight maneuver. Knowing how tight that helix is, this would have been a very insane element. It reminds me a lot of the outward bank turn which is on Twisted Timbers, but it looks even more bizarre in this video. Now, unlike the other roller coasters on this list, I really don't have an explanation for why they decided to go with the more tame helix as opposed to this outward bank turn. Maybe it was too much, maybe the radius was too tight, I have no clue. But what we do know is, this element never came to be, and we got another finale with a helix, and even with the lack of that insane looking element, this ride is top tier. For our next coaster, we are going to go to one of the most historically significant amusement parks of all time, Luna Park at Coney Island. Owned by Zamperla, they have released a lot of prototypes here, including their Thunderbolt model, and of course, Thunderbolt. This is a very compact coaster with some airtime moments and inversions, but this ride looked a little different in the initial animation. In 2013, Luna Park released an animation of this ride, but with a major twist. One of the most shocking parts of this ride is the fact that it would start off with a 120-foot elevator lift. Now, for once again reasons that we don't know, they decided to scrap this idea eventually and replace it with the vertical lift, which is probably a lot more reliable and a bit more thrilling. And today, we have Thunderbolt with a vertical lift instead of an elevator lift. Alton Towers was planning something absolutely incredible for the early 1990s. They had a newly themed area, a custom-made ditch for the new attraction, and plans for very heavy military-based theming. And it looked like an incredible coaster was coming to the resort. Now, you might be thinking, this is how Nemesis came to be, and you would be right. But before the Nemesis we know was planned out, there was plans for another type of roller coaster, and this would have definitely been very unique. So, what happened? They decided to plan for an Aero pipeline coaster. This was a prototype that was still being under development. When Aero proposed the concept for a layout, they had this at a length of under 1,000 feet, which is, if you don't know, a very short amount of length for a roller coaster. They wanted something much bigger and much longer. Alton Towers decided to ditch plans early in the process and go with Bolliger & Mabillard, a company that was more new and modern up on the scene. And they decided to go with their new B&M invert, and it was better at most factors. It was longer, it was more reliable, and of course, it was probably a lot more smooth. But anyways, those were 6 examples of roller coasters that changed their layouts in the designing process. Let me know in the comments below if you have any more of these that you thought about, or if you want me to do a part 2 in general. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about these and the video itself, and like and subscribe. This is Cedar Flags, and I'll see you all later.